Okay then, so this is really the last lesson that I'm going to be uploading for this topic of work, and then we're going to look at some revision-y type activities from that point onwards. So today's lesson is, hopefully, I suppose, you can have a look at these. So the key word here we're looking at is biodiversity. Bio meaning to do with living things, and diversity meaning to do with differences. Okay, so it's differences in the living things. Okay, so we're going to properly define biodiversity. We're going to explain how waste and deforestation and things all have had an impact on the biodiversity of species. And then we're going to look at some ways that people are trying to reduce the impact of human activities on ecosystems and maintain the biodiversity. So, I need you to get this definition in your books. Biodiversity is the variety of all the different species of organisms on Earth or within an ecosystem. Okay, so we can talk about the global biodiversity, or we can talk about the biodiversity in a particular area. Okay, so for example, we could talk about the biodiversity of the Amazon rainforest, and that would be talking about all of the different species, all of the different types of species that there are in the Amazon. Obviously, people are becoming more and more aware of the importance of biodiversity and of the many ways in which human beings are impacting biodiversity across the world. So this is your task for the lesson. I'd like you to complete the table as we go through the PowerPoint. Okay, but obviously you'll probably need to pause the video here to sort of set this table up in your book. We're looking at what these 5 things are, and hopefully we're going to look at some examples. So, particularly in zoos, okay, we have introduced breeding programs. Okay, these are ways that we can try and increase the number of highly endangered species. So by taking, for example, the giant pandas that we have in captivity and breeding them together, we've been able to increase the number of giant pandas that there are in the world, ideally with the view then to reintegrate pandas with the wild. One of the biggest things that's really difficult to do when you've got a very small population is avoid inbreeding. Okay, so that's breeding pandas with other pandas that are similar to them in their family trees. Okay, obviously we as humans don't do that, and actually we've got some laws to stop it happening. But the importance of avoiding inbreeding it's really important that we understand this, because with all the things that we've done looking at genes, people that have similar genes that are negative, you might not otherwise come across them if they were recessive. But in cases like the giant panda, you may, where inbreeding has to take place, you may start to see a number of those negative recessive genes that otherwise you wouldn't see in the wild. Okay, and there are a number of species that we're trying to do this with. There's a YouTube video here that I'll also link in the description that you can have a watch for some more information about endangered species. Okay, next up we've got protection and regeneration of rare habitats. One of the biggest issues here, okay, is deforestation, but also changing climate. And in some cases, human intervention. In the case of tourism, we've lost many habitats. So changing things like sea temperatures obviously affects coral. Tourists damaging coral reefs. Another one of the big ways that we are losing habitats, particularly in the sea, obviously by cutting down trees, large sections of forest, animals that live there are unable to remain in those habitats and breed effectively. We're trying our best at the moment by introducing initiatives and a whole number of other things to try and stop these habitats being endangered, and trying to re-establish some of them. This one's particularly useful for the UK. We've got a lot of hedgerows and field margins that split up our fields. This picture here kind of shows that. You can see all the hedgerows going off in all those different directions. They're actually a massive habitat for a number of organisms that we have in this country. So the destruction of hedgerows is causing issues for a number of animals, particularly things like hedgehogs. They're particularly affected by the breaking up of these hedgerows and by humans building houses in those places. So you will see some people have hedgehog holes for the hedgehogs to be able to travel through their gardens, for example, to be able to find other hedgehogs and to be able to find food. Another YouTube clip here, I'll put this one in the description. Deforestation is probably the most obvious example, and carbon dioxide emissions are kind of all tacked up in that. We're starting to realise that damage is being done as we chop down large areas of forest. The organisms are losing their habitat, and that carbon dioxide is also affecting the global temperature, which is further affecting animals' habitats and breeding, what times of year they're able to find food, what times of year flowers are coming out. And those types of things are being affected by carbon dioxide, particularly the temperature is driving that change there. Obviously, governments are starting to realise this damage, and we're trying to cut back on our CO2 output, because looking at the evidence for carbon dioxide production and the effect of carbon dioxide production, those things are really, really important that we get on top of those, because the evidence showing that CO2 causes global temperature rise is really quite irrefutable. At one point, rainforests in Costa Rica were being felled at the most rapid rate in the world. Obviously, we know that the Amazon rainforest is being destroyed. Miss O'Kelly, right before we went into lockdown, was talking to us about how CAFOB were running a campaign to protect the Amazon rainforest, and specifically protect the people who are doing the protecting of the rainforest. And we've got recycling, which seems obvious. We've talked a lot about in the last year or so about reducing plastic, particularly in the oceans, but also, we can reuse to prevent having to damage more of the earth to get access to materials. So things like aluminium can be taken from the ground, but it's far easier and far less damaging to recycle the aluminium that we've got. And as a result, our government has put in place a whole bunch of initiatives to reduce waste, and you'll probably be aware of quite a few of these. So I'd like you to answer 2 questions in your book after your table. I'd like you to think about what you would do differently to help maintain biodiversity. And I'd like you to have a think about if there's anything that you think that we as a school could do to help maintain biodiversity across the world. Think about that list that you've just written in your table, and think about how those things affect biodiversity. And do you think that we as a school could be better at avoiding those sort of 5 things from happening? Okay, as always, happy isolating. Good luck.